How are you doing, South Hills, Idaho? For those of you who don't know me, my name is Moses Camacho. I'm the senior pastor of South Hills Church. You have walked into one of our locations. South Hills has many locations in Southern California. We have 3 locations outside of California, Idaho being 1, Virginia, and Ohio. And then we also have a campus in Kenya, right outside of the city of Nairobi. We are committed to being one church, and no matter what location you walk into, you're gonna find the same experience everywhere you go. And I just want to take a moment and just celebrate what God is doing through your campus. Pastor Randy and I have been in communication of what God is doing on your campus. He recently informed me that he had over 10 people take the Discover class. If you're new and you haven't heard of Discover, Discover is a class that we offer outside of Sunday morning. And what it does, it gives you an opportunity to get to know who South Hills is, gets you to know who your campus pastor is, Pastor Randy and his wife Hansi. Allows you to hear the heart of South Hills, why God asked South Hills to make a difference in people's lives. Why are we the perfect place for imperfect people? How come we're so intentional about leading people into a growing relationship with Christ? So if you haven't taken Discover, next time Pastor Randy offers it, I encourage you to be a part of it. The other thing I want to celebrate is this. We recently at your campus have launched 2 growth groups. A growth group is an opportunity to get into a small group with other people who are wanting to dig into God's Word, to build community, to allow God to interpret the Bible through someone else's life. And when we get to hear God move in each other's lives, we get a deeper, greater perspective of who God is and how great He can move. And the last thing I want to celebrate are the 3 baptisms you have recently had at your campus. This is a huge accomplishment to see someone take that step of faith and want to have a fresh start, a new beginning. That's what baptism is. When you go underwater and you come up out of the water, you are burying an old life. You are coming up out of the water, a new person, a new creation with a new heart and a new focus of wanting to have God involved in your life in every step you take. So I just want to say congratulations, South Hills, Idaho. You've been doing such an amazing job. You've been reaching your community. You've been walking alongside people who are intentional in wanting to grow in a relationship with God. And it's all because of you. You've been trusting God with your life. You've been trusting God with your finances. You've been trusting God with your time. As you continue to allow God to use you, use your time, use your resources, God will continue to make a difference in people's lives and reach the community that you are living in and serving. Thank you for continuing to support Pastor Randy and Hansi as they continue to lead our South Hills, Idaho campus in your community.
Obviously, we've all got questions for God. But as it turns out, He's got questions for us too. Why these questions, though?
So if you ever want to feel better about yourself, just take a few minutes and look up the kinds of questions that people search for online, specifically in Google. So I ran across a post this week about that very thing, and I'm sad to report that lots and lots and lots of people, like into the tens of thousands of people, have asked Google, is a Sharknado possible? And so that was fantastic. Also, this blew me away. 90,000 people a month search, am I pregnant? I have so many questions to follow up on that one. And then my personal favorite, thousands of people have searched, why does my boss hate me? And I think the answer is because you ask stupid questions. That's probably what that answer is. But maybe you've never Googled a dumb question, but you probably have been in a setting where you asked one before, because we all have. I used to work for a pastor. He was great. His name was Bill. And whenever I would go in and say, hey, pastor, I have kind of a stupid question, he would say, Randy, there are no stupid questions. There's only stupid people who ask questions. And I always appreciated that. I wasn't sure what to say after that, so I would just turn around and walk out. But sometimes it's not a stupid question, it's just the timing of it, right? So I have 2 to 3 Zoom meetings a week, and they are one of my least favorite experiences of life. But one of the things that absolutely drives me crazy is the moment when you're getting to the end of the meeting, and it's all but over, and you're just sort of waiting for the permission from the person that's leading the meeting, and most of the cases for me, that's my boss, to log off. But then somebody will raise their hand and ask a question. And I usually don't even care what the question is at that point. I just want that person to be dragged outside and flogged and then fired, and you're banned from Zoom meetings for the rest of your life. And the worst part is it's usually a question that was already answered at some point during the meeting, but they had they were off doing something else, because that's what everybody does on Zoom meetings, is something else. But now we have to dive back in and make sure everybody's clear, and man, just shoot me in the head, because this is the worst moment ever. But I've also been on the other side of that too. So in addition to all my theological training and all of that, when I was when we were starting our first church back in 2007, for some reason I thought it'd be a good idea to also go to school. And so I went and finished a business degree. And so I was going to school, and I was already in my 30s by that point. So I was way older than most of the students I was sitting in class with. And I had way more questions than I ever asked in any classroom ever. And I could just feel the hatred from the young people in the room, the eye rolls, because the professor would be like, well, okay, so if there's no more questions, we can go ahead and call it a day. And I always would think of one to ask, and I would raise my hand, and it was just this ocean of hate coming my way. At the very least, we've all been in moments when somebody asks a question that's kind of a head scratcher, because the answer seems obvious, right? They ask an obvious question. So the last couple of weeks, we've been in a series, as you just saw on the trailer there, that we've been in a series about the questions that God asks us at different times in the scriptures. And the first couple, if you haven't been here, I encourage you to go back and listen to the podcast. But the first couple of questions that we've kind of covered, that we've spent the last 2 weeks on, are questions that were from the Old Testament. But today, we're going to turn our attention to the New Testament, specifically to Jesus. So there's a moment in John chapter 5 when Jesus asks a question where the answer seems pretty obvious right from the beginning. You don't even have to know that much about the Bible or about this story, but it's going to feel like the answer to the question that Jesus asked is really obvious. So I want to take you to that story and share it with you. If you want to follow along, you can turn to John chapter 9 if you have your Bible, or John chapter 5 if you want to follow in your Bible app. If you don't, that's okay. It's all going to be on the screen as well. So John chapter 5, beginning with verse 1, says this. It says, sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem, near the sheep gate, a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered porches. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. And one who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. And when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked them, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me," which is a strange answer, and I'm going to explain why he gave that answer in a second. Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." At once, the man was cured, and he picked up his mat and walked. So the little backstory that John gives us on this is that Jesus heads up to Jerusalem during one of the Jewish festivals. And that's because he was a rabbi. And so as a rabbi, he was always in Jerusalem to celebrate the Jewish festivals. And during the festivals, there were about 10 times the amount of people in the city that would come from all over the country to celebrate that festival. And right near the entrance to the temple was a pool that had 5 different covered porches surrounding it. And people who were sick and disabled would come and lay around that pool. People who were deaf and blind and paralyzed, and they would lay around the pool. And during the festivals, the number of people that were laying around that pool would swell as well. And so Jesus is headed up to the temple, and he passes by the pool, and he sees all the sick and disabled people lying around. But for some reason, this one guy catches his attention. And John tells us that the man had been an invalid, that he'd been paralyzed for 38 years. So and part of what John is communicating to us is that this guy had suffered more and longer than a lot of people would even live at this point in history. And so when Jesus sees him and he learns how long he's been there, he asks him the question, do you want to get well? Now, we read the guy's response, which was like, hey, I'm trying to get in the water, but I can't get in the water because there's no one to help me. Now, if that seems like an odd part of the story to you, it might be because we're missing this small but key piece of information to the story. See, there was a legend that an angel would occasionally come down and stir the waters of that pool. And it was believed that when that happened, when the angel would stir the waters of that pool, that if you were the first one into the pool, that you would be healed. And so if you believed that, it's not hard to imagine why, if you're sick and disabled, you'd hang out all day, every day by this pool, just hoping and waiting that the water would be stirred so that you can be the first one in and be healed. See, right off the bat, what I want you to hear about this story is that people then weren't really any different from us. More often than we'd like to admit, more often than we probably even recognize, our lives aren't driven by things that are actually true. They're driven by things that we believe are true. And that's the reality for us in a lot of different areas of our life, but it's especially true when it comes to faith and God and the scriptures. So it's incredible the kind of pull, and you've probably experienced this, that something can have on us and the direction of our lives and what we're about when we become convinced this thing right here, this is what's real. Like, have you ever tried to help somebody who's going the wrong direction and making the wrong choices, but they're doing it based on something that they believe is true, but to you it's obvious that there's zero chance that what they're doing will give them the life or the outcome that they want. And you're trying to convince them of that, and it's almost impossible because they have become convinced this is what's real, this is what's true. So this guy in the story, along with lots of other people, believed that there was an angel that stirred the water, and if you were the first one in, you would be healed. Which seems a little bit odd, to be honest. It seems actually kind of crazy. I mean, at the very least, I think it'd be kind of a cruel thing for God to do. But what's interesting, though, is that I actually think this is the view that so many of us actually have of God. That somehow he's limited in his goodness and his generosity. That he keeps putting us in scenarios where we have to fight for his singular act of grace towards us. And so we approach him almost like this cosmic vending machine. We want to give him what he wants. If we put in the right inputs in the right order at the right time, which, by the way, is so much of what religion is about, right? If we do the right things and we get on his good side, then he'll spit out the life that we really want. And so Jesus approaches this guy with all that as the backstory and says, do you want to get better? Do you want to be made well? What an incredibly clarifying question. See, Jesus doesn't assume that the thing he knows that we need is actually what we want. This guy had spent 38 years trying to get to the water first because of what he believed. Think about that. Think about what was going on in your life 38 years ago. And the time and the space and everything that's happened between, that you spent all of that time every day in the same place trying to do the same thing. That was this guy's life. See, I think this moment where Jesus approaches this guy and asks this question, it actually begins to open up a whole bunch of questions I think that we should wrestle with. Because Jesus approaching him saying, do you want to get well? I think it begs the question for us. Like, where are you trying to get to? which I think is a really important question for us to stop and wrestle with in our life. Because life happens and our lives go by faster than we think, and days add up to weeks, and weeks turn into months, and months into years, and then decades go by, and just like that, your 25-year-old self becomes your 55-year-old self. Anybody know what I'm talking about? And you're like, I still got it. No, you don't. No, you don't. You lost it about 25 years ago. And you start wondering, like, what is it that I've been chasing after my whole life? What is it that I gave all I had to try to achieve? Where was it that I thought was so important that I gave every waking moment of my life trying to get there? So I want to ask you this morning, where is it that you're trying to get to? Where are you headed? What are you giving your life to? What are you spending your days on right now? Is there a pool of water that you believe gets stirred up by an angel, and if you can just get there, your life will miraculously get better in that moment? Because as crazy as this story sounds, I actually think that most of us do think like this. Most of us do spend our life like this, where we think, if I can just reach this point, if I could just have that, if I could live there, if I could just get married, and then other people are going, if I could just get out of this marriage. See, we all have our own magic pools that we're chasing after, that we think we're going to fix everything. And we don't just do that in our individual lives. I mean, think about us as a culture. Think about us collectively, right? It happens, you've probably worked in organizations where that's the thing. It's like everybody's just like, if we just get here, it's going to fix everything, right? It happens in churches. I've worked in churches for, 30 plus years. It happens to us nationally. If we can just get our people and our guy in there, that'll fix everything. That'll change everything. That's the magic pool. The problem is, like, once we start thinking this way, it automatically becomes, every situation around that becomes a win-lose scenario. Because there's nowhere else for it to go, right? We become driven by our own advantage because we got to get to the pool first, because it's only the first person in that gets healed. I mean, think about the guy in the story, right? If there really is a pool that's stirred by an angel that heals the first person in, then the only thing that matters, if you're that guy or anybody like him, is getting to that pool and into that water before anybody else. And it's not that I don't care about other people or what happens to them. I certainly don't want to have to push people out of the way to be the first one, but it's not my fault that the first person in gets healed. I didn't set the system up this way. It's just the way that it is. And I'm a fool if I don't do everything I have to do to get to the pool before you. But I can tell you that God is never going to create a scenario where he chooses me to win and everybody else to lose. See, I think one of the best ways that you can know that you're on a journey with God is if you actually care about the success and the welfare and the blessing and the healing of other people as much as you do about your own. That you actually love, Jesus said it this way, that you love your neighbor as yourself. You probably know that verse if you've been around church very long. It's actually part of something that Jesus said in Matthew 22, and he said it in response to an expert in the Old Testament scriptures who was trying to outsmart him and trap him by going like, what's the most important thing to God? What's the if there's one commandment that trumps them all, what is it? And Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and strength. And knowing part of the reason why the guy asked the question was so he didn't have to care about anybody else. Jesus says, and the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And he says something incredible. He says, all of the law and the prophets, and that doesn't mean anything to us, but to everybody who heard that, is like everything sacred that you believe, everything that God has ever said is summed up in those two commands. See, Jesus isn't trying to get you to feel something or even to believe something. He's trying to get you and I to live something. So I love that Jesus asks this man, this invalid, such an obvious question. He's just like, so what is it that you want? Like, really? What is it that you're after? And if you're the guy, aren't you a little frustrated? Like, I've been here 38 years. Isn't it kind of obvious what I'm trying to do, what I want? But notice that the guy's answer to Jesus' question doesn't actually answer the question. Jesus says, do you want to get well? That is a yes or no question. But he immediately goes into this long answer about how he's got nobody there to help him get into the pool. And why would they? After all, if I help you get into the pool, that's robbing me of the opportunity to get in first. And so this guy spent his entire life trying to make something happen that he is incapable of making happen. And I think this is the place where a lot of us kind of get stuck in our belief and our faith in God and our relationship with God. Because some of us are convinced that there isn't a solution to our situation because the only one that we can see, the only one that we believe is available, is not available to us. And so that's when we start kind of getting angry with God, bitter at life. I think if we were honest, we'd have to admit that most of the time, we want God to do what we want him to, not what we actually need him to. God, have you ever just said that? God, if you'll do this, then I will follow you. If you'll do this, I'll obey you. If you'll do this, I'll believe in you. This is what you need to do to prove yourself to me. If you do this, I'll know you love me. If you'll do this, then I promise. Like, what are we trying to do? We're trying to get God to do what we want him to, not what we need him to do in us. And so the guy is standing there explaining to God in the flesh how he needs to get his help trying to get where he's trying to go. Which I think is really kind of funny and also really telling. See, because after you ask yourself the question, where am I going? The next logical question becomes, what do I think will happen when I get there? See, I think maybe the craziest thing about this story to me is that the guy spent 38 years of his life trying to get to the water first, and had he gotten there, nothing would have happened to him. Because the healing of God wasn't in that water. I mean, can you imagine if that happens, how confusing and maddening and demoralizing and infuriating and overwhelming and disillusioning that would be? If you had this belief in your faith about who God is and what he's going to do for you, if you just get to that pool and then you get in there and it doesn't happen, you just be like, the whole thing's made up. It's not real. It's not even true. See, you need to be careful what pool you're trying to get to, because when you get there, it's not going to be what you think it is. See, Jesus didn't ask him, hey, do you need my help getting where you think you should go? Do you need my help getting over to the pool? No, he asked them, do you want to get well? And instead of asking Jesus to make him whole, like, hey, your reputation precedes you. In fact, we picked it up in John chapter 5. The reason why it says sometime later is because right before this, Jesus healed a whole bunch of people. So the crowds were around Jesus, his reputation. Instead of saying, God, would you just heal me? Instead, he's like, I know what I need. I know what would make me whole. I know what will help me. Can you just help me get over there? I wonder how many of us approach God and God's going, hey, I want to just completely change this part of your life. And you're like, no, that's cool. Would you just help me get to the water? And you can almost in this moment feel the unspoken question from Jesus of like, what do you think's going to happen when you get there, if you get there? I mean, this is why I'm not God, because I was thinking if I'm Jesus, I'm tempted to just pick the guy up and carry him over there and toss him into the water. And while he's like bubbling under the water and about to drown, go, hey, how's it working out for you? That stirred water, is it helping? Oh, you still can't move? Okay, let me pull you out. Because the truth is that's kind of what happens to us, right? When we got to the pool, we got to the stirring water, and now we're drowning in the very place that we thought we would find our healing. See, Jesus didn't come to attack and condemn us, but he also didn't come to appease and placate us. and sort of play into our delusions. He's not going to pretend that getting you to the magical waters is what you need, or that you getting the thing that you're convinced will change everything will actually change anything. I don't know about you, but I've known so many people. They made it to the stirred waters, whatever it was for them, only to realize it was empty. It was a mirage. It wasn't what they thought. It didn't change anything. Instead of realizing like, oh, there's some other truth I'm missing, they just started looking for the next pool to chase. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 12 says, there's a way that appears to be right, but in the end it leads to death. It appears, it seems, it looks right to us that we just go, I think this is true. I think this sounds right. This appears to be the way that I should go. But then we get there and it's empty and it's broken and it's death and we drown in it. So after the back and forth with this guy, Jesus looks at him and simply says, like, I love that he just doesn't even say like, nah, I'm not going to help you get to the water, or you idiot, that's not true, whatever, like whatever I would say. He just says, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Now, if Jesus' initial question was annoying, I think this would just be flat out offensive if you're this guy. Because the first thing you're thinking is like, seriously? Oh, okay. Like, you think if I could have done that on my own, I would have done it already, Jesus. Keep moving. There's somebody else I need to talk to. But the thing is Jesus isn't asking him to do it on his own. He's just asking him to trust that if he does what God is asking him to do, then God will do what only he can do. See, and that's the truth for you and I this morning. If you will do what God is asking you to do, then he'll do the part that you can't do. Because there is a part that you can't do. But the part you can do, he won't do for you. See, this guy had been like this for 38 years. Think about that, right? The muscles aren't just atrophied at that point. They are non-existent. Even if he could stand up, he shouldn't even have the strength to walk, much less bend over and pick up his mat and carry it. And that's what I love about this healing. I mean, it doesn't give us a ton of information, but clearly Jesus doesn't just heal his paralysis. He healed and restored all the nerves and the muscles and the bones and the ligaments and the tissue, and all the things that had deteriorated for the last 38 years are instantly restored. He gave him the strength to go over and walk and pick up his mat that he'd been laying on. And can I tell you something that you don't want to hear? Often the miracle that you and I need almost always hinges on our willingness to participate in that miracle. See, the question is, do you want to get better, or do you just want to feel a little better? Do you want to get better, or do you want to feel better? Because getting better is going to actually take some participation on your part. Whenever Jesus would heal somebody in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, the stories of the life of Jesus, he almost always gave them something that they needed to do, some action that they would need to take. And for the people in those situations, it's easy for us. We read them and we're just like, yeah, it's just simple. Go over there and just get up and pick up your mat. None of them were easy or obvious, though, in the given moment. So to a rich guy who came to Jesus because his life was still missing something, in Mark chapter 10, Jesus tells him, go and sell all you have and give it to the poor. To a woman who was caught in adultery in John 8, after saving her life and forgiving her sin, Jesus says, go and sin no more. To a man who'd been blind from birth in John 9, Jesus creates a mixture of mud and saliva and puts it on his face and his eyes. And then he tells him, while he's still blind, but also with mud on his face now, to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. In Mark chapter 5, Jesus heals a guy who'd been demon-possessed, and he tells him to go home and tell all of his family and friends what God had done for him. In Luke chapter 17, Jesus heals a guy with leprosy. If you have leprosy, it was a death sentence in the first century. You were cast out. You could not live around people or be around people. And if people would approach you, you'd have to yell out and declare that you're unclean so that they could steer clear of you. Jesus not only still doesn't steer clear of him, he goes over and touches this guy and heals him. And then he tells him to go and show himself to the priest, which is a huge risk because the priests are the one that determined that you were sick to begin with and kicked you out of the city. See, it's no different for you and I. But here's what I wonder. What is it that you've determined is too high a price for you to pay, for you to get your healing, for you to actually move forward, for you to actually move to a different place in your life? What is it that you've decided you're not going to do because it's just too embarrassing or it's too much work or it's too painful or it costs too much or it's going to take too long, it just seems impossible, or it's just not the way that you would have done it if you were God? Because sometimes that's just it. I ain't doing that, God. Because if I was God, I would just do it easy. If I would make it easy for me. Here's what I can tell you from my own life. Getting better will almost always require you to take an action in an area that you've been avoiding. Almost always. I've experienced this in so many different ways, where the healing that my soul needed was on the other side of forgiveness that I didn't want to give. That the family I couldn't imagine that he's given me was on the other side of letting go of the dream that I had about what it was going to look like and how it was going to be built. I mean, I could just go on and on about my relationships, my extended family, my life, my personal life, my ministry, all of these moments requiring me to do something that I just have been avoiding, a conversation, dealing with something in my soul. See, in the story, Jesus is trying to get the guy to realize that maybe the answer isn't over there. Maybe the answer is just right here. For 38 years, this guy had failed to get where he thinks he needs to go to get the healing that he's so longing for. And God, the only one who can heal the human soul and the human body, is standing right in front of him going, what is it that you're trying to get done? And he's going, I'm trying to get over there. And that is the beauty of Jesus' question, because it's basically Jesus like, no, you're not. That's not what you're trying to do. That's not what you really want. What you're trying to do is to get healed. So just pick up your mat, get up, and walk. And that's exactly what he did. He got up, picked up his mat, and he walked. And what did he do first? Where did he walk to? We don't know. We don't get a lot of details. But I think I can tell you where he didn't walk, what he didn't do, is I don't think he got up, healed, and then ran over and jumped in the pool. I don't think he did that. And see, I think for a lot of us, we think that that's how faith happens. Like, I give my life to Jesus, and now he gives me everything I wanted before Jesus was in my life. But the truth is, when Jesus heals us and he helps us, it's not so that we can get where we were trying to get in the first place. He tells us to get up and walk so that we can stop pursuing the stirred waters and actually move in a completely new direction that's healthy and whole for our lives. Maybe the most frustrating part of the story to me is when Jesus says, get up, take up your mat and walk. It says, at once he did it. Some translations say immediately. And that is a frustrating part of the story, because there are situations and there are times where those kinds of moments happen, and what God is working in our life happens at once, immediately. And it cannot be explained in any other way than that that's what God did in that moment, that we got up and we walked. But there's also been plenty of moments where it didn't happen at once. It happened over a period of time. And that's the thing. That's what's so frustrating about God, is we don't get to decide. We just have to decide, are we going to do the thing that he told us to do? So in John chapter 5, a few verses later, in verse 14, same story. It says, later Jesus found him. This is the invalid man that had been healed. He found him at the temple, and he said to him, see, you are well again. Just tells us a little bit about his story, that he wasn't born like this. Something happened to him. you are well again. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. Now, I don't know about you when you read that. When I read that, I'm like, oh, it's a little crazy. That's disturbing. I mean, it feels threatening and ominous. Like Jesus is going, all right, look, you better mind your P's and Q's, mister, because I'm watching you. If you don't, I'm taking it back. You'll be right back on that mat over there. That's not what he's saying. See, Jesus isn't threatening him at all. He's not threatening him with his healing. His healing of his physical body at that point was permanent. See, this is Jesus going, hey, don't waste this. Don't waste this. You wasted 38 years sitting in that spot. Don't get stuck sitting at another pool for another 38 years. This is Jesus going, hey, there are things that are worse than being paralyzed. And you have to pay attention to the life that you're living, because otherwise you'll find yourself sitting at a pool that can't satisfy your soul, thinking that if you could just get in the water, it'll change everything. Don't spend your life chasing something that's not real, that could never help you, that could never heal or satisfy you. This is Jesus saying, go, just almost like he said to the woman in John 8, go and sin no more. So I wonder, where are you trying to get to? I wonder if you've been trying to get to some magical pool where the angel stirs the water so that you can be healed. It's exhausting, isn't it? How much of your life have you spent trying to get someplace that will never change you, that could never help you, that will never heal you? So later this summer, we're actually going to do a series in July and August about how we all have sort of a core central question that drives us in our lives. And it's a different question for each of us. But for me, kind of the core question that drives my life is, does my life count? Does it matter? Is there some significance that I actually was here, that I lived? And so because that's kind of the core driving question of my life, I'm constantly tempted to sacrifice people and relationships and the people that mean the most to me in the pursuit of trying to achieve some level of success so that I can say, see, I was significant. And so I've spent a huge chunk of my time, not just as a believer, not just as a follower of Jesus, but as a pastor, thinking that if I could just get a church to a certain size, if I could just speak to a certain size crowd, if I could get there, that there's a magic pool, and if I could get to that pool, it would change everything. It would mean that my life mattered. And there have been times where God, I don't know if it was just in his grace, allowed me to get to the pool, where I've led churches of good size, and I've preached to crowds that are bigger than should listen to me. And you know what? It was empty. Nothing changed. I walked off the stage still feeling insignificant. My wife going, you matter to your kids. You matter to me. You've been a good dad. And there's times, honestly, when that thing's driving me, where my response to her is almost like, yeah, but, that doesn't count. That's the only thing that counts. See, here's what I can tell you. There is no there where Jesus is waiting to meet you. There's only here. There's only where you are right now. When Jesus walked up to the man, there was no there over there where Jesus was going to meet him. He's standing right here. And it's true for you and me. He's moving toward you this morning, and he's got a simple question. Do you want to get well? Do you want to get better? Maybe instead of trying to explain to him the life that you want and trying to get him to help you to get over there, maybe it'd be better if we just stopped and just paused and say, yes, I do want to get well. I do want to get healed. I will follow you wherever you lead me. Don't waste your life trying to get somewhere you should have never been anyway. Don't waste your life trying to find what your soul longs for in a place that could never satisfy it. He's not over there. He's right in front of you, offering you his love and his life, his healing. And so here's what I want to challenge you to do. Here's what I invite you to do this week. If you're a follower of Jesus, identify one area in your life where you already know what God wants you to do. You already know. And you can be like, but I don't know. You know. Instead of making excuses, just go do it. It can look in it can take on all kinds of forms. It can be a relationship thing. It can be like, hey, church has just been this side thing and God's going, hey, why don't you actually lean into this? It could be something at your job. It could be something in your family. It could be something with your finances. It could be some way that you're serving. Maybe when Brooklyn and Maggie were talking about the CASA program, like there's something in you that you go like, gosh, this is the thing. And you just immediately you started going, I can't, I'm too busy, I don't have time, it's too complicated, I wouldn't be good, whatever. What is the thing? What's one area in your life where you already know what God wants you to do? Stop making excuses and go do it. And by the way, if you are a person of faith, if you are a follower of Jesus, and you don't have an area where God is asking you to do something that you don't want to do, you might not be listening good enough. Because if you got your life down to where you can manage it, and you're doing all the things that in your mind God has asked you to do, your life's too small. Your life's too small. Do you want to get well? Do you want to get better? He's here. Let's pray.
South Hills Church, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for watching our service online. Whether you're watching it for the first time or you're watching it again because you enjoyed the service so much from the weekend, I'd like to take a moment and dive into our giving. Every week we give people the opportunity to give back and give to the local church so that God can continue to bless your lives and bless your finances. Here at South Hills, we believe that everything comes from God. We believe that He's the one that chose us and brought us into this world, gave us our gifts and talents and abilities. And I just want you to know that when we give, we are giving back what God has already given to us. If you've ever seen any of our envelopes at a South Hills campus, you'll see on there that it says, every week at South Hills, your generosity is giving people the opportunity to live a better story. And there's a scripture on there in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 that says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I want to encourage you today to click down below and set up your giving, whether it's for the first time or whether you're doing reoccurring giving. We have 4 ways to give here at South Hills. 1, you can do it in person at any of our campuses through an envelope. Or 2, you can actually text any amount that you would like to 84321. And the 3rd way is to download our Church Center app. I encourage you to do this one because the Church Center app gives you opportunity to stay connected with our church and your campuses. It's a great tool and resource for you to know what's going on. And the 4th way to give is to give online. You can go to southhills.org/give and you can set up your giving there. Whether you're a guest of our church or whether you are a member of our church, or whether you simply just like to watch our services, I encourage you to trust God with your finances so that He can bless and anoint your finances and you can be trusting God in this journey of living life to the fullest. I love you and thank you for watching our online service today.